Blendworth's story has no consequence except to explain how Frank got possession of the cabin located at the end of Hollow Road. Blendworth wandered into town a couple of years ago. He was close to 40, and one look persuaded most people that he hadn't done much for himself or the world. He claimed to be a writer and brandished a wrinkled photo of him, noticeably younger, carrying a suitcase behind Norman Mailer. Years of sensuality dissolved Blendworth's encompassing dark eyes into blurry observers, but to some women, including young women, thought them softened by the abrasions of truth. Among these abrasions was the rude cabin at the end of remote Hollow Road. The structure was the stark effort of Squinty Slurts, a dear man with a sincere work ethic, but compelled to enter and exit many trades to further his avoidance of sobriety. He was given the property, once a wood lot, by an aunt who thought guzzling and carpentry were compatible. The cabin he erected evidenced the time Gallows vin rosé was in full bloom. The finished abode avoided indoor plumbing, and fortunately for the fire department, gave the same cold shoulder to electricity. When some years ago Squinty had migrated with his flattened thumbs from carpentry to the business of unclogging sewer pipes and draining septic tanks, he sold the habitat for the nickel it was worth to Xenia Jefferson, a local realtor with a wizard-like premonition of the future value of the 10 acres it sat on. The rent was so low that Blendworth paid Xenia in rolled coin, with no intended insult. No matter the modest rent, Blendworth's dedication to letters required monthly prostrations to excuse its lateness, accompanied by that lowest form of begging, the gift of a poem signed by the author. Dedication to letters, as most understand, especially spouses and near spouses of those dedicated to letters, has long implied a sacred vow to poverty, whose worship remanded Blendworth to the cheaper luncheonettes, where, over a 10th cup of coffee in the company of peer literati, he planned new publications, redrafted manifestos, reviewed works, launched broadsides, composed what he insisted on calling tractata, decried mediocrity, and denounced the troubled republic in the soft cadence desired by libraries. Eddie, a mole of a man with thick horn-rimmed glasses goggling on his tiny nose over a wispy mustache, had slumped into his 50s, but was once a fact-checker for a prestigious magazine, a career retarded by vices and vitriolic marriages. Folks didn't know how Eddie got by. Some suspected a connection from Kabul for a blend of black, gooey hash streaked with opium. What is certain is such connection existed with someone in town. Eddie, always cross-eyed stoned, never failed to attend the literary luncheonette meetings, his condition explaining his blindness to the fact that the universe circled Blendworth. For indeed, Eddie was often interrupted the Blendworth discourse. So often it was questioned how he had ever penetrated the Blendworth clash, which comprised several men and some women. The sane ones were not attractive, and the attractive ones were not sane. All loved coffee. As an example of Eddie's impertinence, a United States congressman, after deciding that one disastrous war wasn't enough, but that we should also fight drugs, had recently introduced legislation to deny government-backed scholarships to college applicants guilty of committing a drug offense. This outraged Blendworth. He labored over a long remonstrance. The missive marched unfinished into its 7th page, strafed by coffee and drabs of egg salad, with no camp in sight. Blendworth's platoon of coffee lovers, initially enthusiastic to be part of this defense of youth, as construction of the redoubt grew more tedious, shirked its duty and prepared to adjourn the campaign for another day, when Eddie, who had finished scribbling, read his letter. Dear Congressman, regarding the proposed legislation to deny federal assistance to college applicants found guilty of committing drug offense, may I humbly suggest that in addition you consider denying assistance to applicants found guilty of robbery, rape, and murder. Please contact me if I can be of any assistance with this, etc., etc. Last fall, to get on with the reasons for the cabin's vacancy, Blenworth stumbled upon a case of Canadian Club whiskey. The case lay 20 feet from the back door of Deanie's restaurant, perhaps a fault of the delivery man. But Blenworth found no reason to think it shouldn't lay 30 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet, the many thousands of feet stretching from the back door of Deanie's restaurant to the threshold of his cabin at the end of Hollow Road, where, after his labors, the case now sat. His aching back whittled the remorse normally attending blunt thievery to a sharp defense of gleaning. Word of his bounty spread. The rush to Blenworth's abode depopulated the cheaper luncheonettes and depressed the price of coffee. The Blenworth hearth treated on issues not resolved in the Academy, and the symposium endured for as long as 12 bottles of Canadian whiskey slaked the thirst of the town's literati. Blenworth woke alone in his cabin. 11 empty Canadian Club bottles stood on the tabletop. Blenworth paid scant attention to the muster and passed on his way to wash in the cold stream. The body of Eddie, face down, the 12th bottle of Canadian Club laying shattered next to his head, obstructed Blenworth's ablutions. For all the times Blenworth wished to strike them all, it made perfect sense he finally had, and rid the world of the fact-checker with his habit of scuttling the Blenworth way. Homicide, however, gave Blenworth pause, such that he noted the generous layer of fallen leaves in the nearby woods, how easy it would be to obscure Eddie, and Blenworth calculated how quickly the evidence would be gnawed beyond the feasibility of a forensic determination of murder by the skunks and raccoons that infested the area. The Hollow Road pavement ended a quarter of a mile before the cabin, thereafter a rutted passage. But there was a time when animal-driven carts traveled past the location, on up the mountain to the Greene County Railroad. The Holsheckers, one of the town's ancient clans, opened a small trading post. The store is the sole instance of proprietorship in that clan's history. Henry Ford bankrupted the enterprise when vehicles sped around the mountain on paved roads rather than essay its rutted incline. The trading post has since rotted into its dry-stacked stone foundation, and the rocky pit baffles strangers to the area as much as would an ancient cairn. Obviously, much effort had been expended, but for what implacable and pitiless purpose? This day, when Eddie lay dead on the ground, old Holshecker, so old he remembered the trading post when it had thrived, decided to show his grandson, maybe it was his great-grandson, what sort of metal Holsheckers were, that it hadn't always been axle grease and stingy bosses, that once upon a time Holsheckers soared high in the world. And on their way up the mountain toward the trading post's open grave, he and the boy saw Blenworth drag a man's body into the fief of skunks and raccoons and obscure it under brush and leaves. The town didn't have a police department. It hired constables who dressed like police, and the report of a man dragging a body into the woods was forwarded by the constabulary to the state police and the county sheriff, despite the respective agencies' hatred for each other. Hatred such that Captain Sam Colby drove like a demon, even through the shady bends, to get there first. He found Blenworth sitting on the stoop, hair still wet from bathing, shivering because the sun had scampered behind clouds and a cool wind whipped up. His eyes were brazed with dead whiskey, and he shivered violently as Sam got out of the unmarked car. "Take me to the body." "What body?" "The one you drug." "Drug where?" "You tell me." Blenworth broke. Sam slapped on the cuffs and stuck him in the back seat, from where Blenworth admitted to the aesthetic qualms that finally led him to bludgeon Eddie. Sam started to the Kingston lockup, giving the state cop the finger as he passed him on the hill. Blenworth, writer, made headlines across the county. Reports included Blenworth's unrepentant jailhouse interviews. Eddie's status as a World War II veteran, however, dimmed Blenworth's glory. Eddie served in the Pacific. This became known after his immediate family, once located, demurred from the honor of interring Eddie and furnished Army discharge papers which implied, in their opinion, the government's obligation. The local VFW post responded, firing letters to the papers to counter Blenworth's despicable, self-serving excuses for murdering the patriot, followed by making proper arrangements with the town's spry old undertaker, and last by raising money for burial plot and engaging a color guard and a corps of riflemen to offer the final salute. This did not dam the stream of Blenworth rationales diligently channeled by the press. The VFW's call to honor Eddie's sacrifice for God and country rang oddly in the ears of some quietly observant people smoking the last globs of gooey hash streaked with opium, especially after the VFW's rhetoric elevated Eddie into a neck-and-neck race with Hector for the all-time service award. The autopsy, meanwhile, took forever. A busybody reporter discovered that the Army had issued Eddie a general discharge, begging the question, why hadn't it been honorable? Thereafter, it was reported, Eddie was stationed in Guam in October '45, when he and several GIs were arrested for taking sexual liberties with a water buffalo. These liberties had abused Guamian sensibilities. Several GIs were promptly convicted and dishonorably discharged and shipped off to what had to have been jaw-clenched homecomings. MPs testified, however, that after rounding up the perverts, Private Edwin had complained to them, "God damn it, and I didn't even get..." Photos of water buffalo cut Blenworth's epistolary campaign for redemption from the papers. Readers insisted that the press locate the water buffalo, or as one open-minded reader wrote, "I'd just like to see what real harm was done to that gang-bang buffalo." Those disposed toward Blenworth, while admitting to the seriousness of murder, advised the editor that Eddie's bludgeoning was proper retribution for the abused water buffalo. Those in the Eddie camp demanded that the Army issue a full, honorable discharge, since it was never proved the patriot ever fucked the Guamian heifer. Letters of this stripe to the editor, and there were many, soured the VFW membership to the point it publicly lamented sacrifices to that amendment to the Constitution of the United States pertaining to a free press. The autopsy, when finally performed, indicated Eddie died from a massive heart attack. Oddly, considering his masterpiece, Blenworth, writer, became Blenworth itinerant, and the town's interest in the water buffalo and literary collapsed. Frank finished his third drink and asked the bartender, "So, the cabin is available?" "Well, nobody's seen Blenworth since he got out of jail. Check it out with Jefferson Realty." "Thanks." Frank paid up, tipped well, and walked back to the guest house for more sleep. He was followed every step of the way.